What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about one of the repeated messages that we've been hearing since we went to school, namely the survival of the fittest. I don't know about you, but as long as I remember, when I went to school in biology classes, psychology classes, you name it, I keep hearing that message repeatedly. And I came to believe it until I did my own studies. And that's one thing that I would like to share with you, because I'm going to challenge that notion a little bit. And I want you to bear with me when I challenge it, because that will potentially shift our perception in a way that will be better at surviving. By the way, if you're new to the channel, in this channel, all we're talking about human psychology, more specifically at the invisible brain, the neuroscience of the invisible brain, which is, in this case, is brain frequencies that create the electromagnetic field all around us, because it also impacts the cellular frequencies. So we do that so that we can understand ourselves and understand our environment, especially this changing environment, better, so that we could help ourselves become more successful and be able to, for us also to be able to maneuver in these sort of changing times. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do so right now. You know, I would appreciate it very much. And also, if you like the content, go ahead and like, share, comment, if you like, only if you like, of course. So let's go back to this notion of the survival of the fittest. In my own lab, basically, most of my studies were circling around the topics that we've already talked about, but at a frequency and brain frequency and cellular frequency level. I did that while I was working in tech, but in the meantime, just because I love research and I love understanding and I love knowledge so much, I would also spend my spare time into doing my own sort of research and study based on my conversations and my anecdotal studies. One of the topics that on the side, not related to, at least in the beginning, was not related to my PhD. But one topic that really fascinated me was the difference among people when comparing them for people who are actually successful / happy. By the way, I never define success as just money. It's basically a holistic view about a human being and how they are experiencing their lives. So comparison between those who are happy and successful, based on the definition that I just said, to those who are not. Because at the end of the day, we all have the same type of brain, especially if we are healthy. We have the same type of body, especially if we are healthy. And we have the same amount of time and space in this world. Obviously, our surroundings differ a lot, which has a lot to do with how we navigate and how we survive this world. But nonetheless, at the bottom line of it, it's sort of, you know, it's the same biology. It's the same type of creation that we are as human beings. So that really fascinated me in terms of the difference, because I wanted to see whether there was a difference. Now a lot of people have studied these, both as scientists, but also as psychologists, from all different aspects. Also business people have really studied these. So I started reading their papers and their resources and their articles first, because that's basically what you do first when you want to start doing a research, because based on that you then form a hypothesis. So you form an educated hypothesis, if you will. And one thing that I kept noticing that was missing was most, if not all, of these articles and papers and whatnot, they were really focusing on sort of, again, the physical aspect of the body in terms of the brain, the neurons and neurotransmitters, and also the psychology, environment, etc. Which is great, and that is really fine. But none of them, at least to my knowledge till this day, were actually looking at the brain frequency level. And again, as you know, that's what I was interested in. Also, one thing I noticed that when they were doing their studies, their samples were usually pretty limited. But I was interested in having a sample size and a demographics for this study, which was, by the way, not your typical, peer-reviewed studies. It was just something that I wanted to do on the side by myself, on my own, as a hobby, if you will, a hobby study. And I noticed also that, for example, they were not including all type of demographics. And I really wanted to have a huge range of demographics, going from homeless people to really, really wealthy people. And so because of that, over a period of 6 to 7 years, I would just collect data. And I would do it on my spare time. And I would just have a specific questions in mind that I had designed them to be very neutral. So I would let the person speak it himself or herself, so that I wouldn't really lead them to any questions. And I would just ask people. I even would stop sometimes some homeless people, and I would just ask them, or the ones that I would help, for example, on the street. Every time I would just collect data. And I would do it with Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, friends, and I would also do it with people at work, that some of them were really wealthy. And I would also collect data from other really wealthy people that I didn't necessarily have access to, like Warren Buffett, but I would be able to find some of the questions that were asked of him. So I would also be able to take notes of that. And this whole thing started one day with my interaction with a homeless guy in San Francisco. And I noticed that, or I think it was in Sacramento, I'm not really sure, but it was years ago. But I noticed the attitude that this man had, and it was an older man, and I was very interested in that because I was sort of helping him, and then I kind of started having some conversation with him, and I started asking him this question, and he was really open to responding, and I noticed a huge difference in the attitude that he had, and Mind you that this guy had literally nothing, basically, a homeless person on the street. And then I asked also about him, obviously I tried to be very respectful and not being offensive. So I kept asking him, may I ask you this? And, he was really open about it. And he told me also about his history, and it was amazing to me. I mean, I got goosebumps all the way. And afterwards, when I left him, I just started crying because the guy was just so amazingly grateful and such a great attitude. And he pretty much, at that point in time, at least, didn't have anything. I mean, he barely had teeth to chew something. And that's pretty much how it all started. And then I started collecting, these type of data again as a hobby. Long story short, because I'm sure you're more interested in the results than the journey itself, was that after so many years of sort of on the side and as a hobby collecting these data, I noticed a pattern, and the pattern was, regardless of the demographics of these people, it had nothing to do with what they had at that point in time, but it had to do with the way in which they handled situations throughout. Even a homeless guy, you might not call him a successful guy, but I call him a successful guy if he is much happier in that moment that I sat with him, then one of my friends who has like all kinds of jewelry and I was gonna say jewelry and all kinds of cars and stuff, and he is not happy. So to me, that was sort of the breaking moment of how to, measure that sort of a survival rate, because I was interested in surviving a situation when you're homeless, and at that point in time you basically have to deal with all sort of things on a daily basis, and you really don't know maybe the next day what the next day brings. So that had to do with the success rate of that survival of the fittest, because that's, again, going back to the question. And so, long story short, after all these sort of data collection, I realized that it really had not much to do with survival of the fittest, but survival of the most flexible, of the least stagnant, of the least those people who just you just can't break them, you just can't have a conversation with them. They're always very rigid, that's the word I was looking for. So the least rigid, those were the people who were able to swim through all these unpredictable situations on a daily basis, most of which are actually entrepreneurs as well. And they were, at the end, they were really successful because they were able to survive all these changing movements, changing frequencies, changing environment, changing people, changing rules of regulation, and they were still survive, but not only just surviving, but also coming out of it with the greatest attitude. And you can see that mainly in successful entrepreneurs. And a successful entrepreneur, by the way, is not only an entrepreneur who has money, but an entrepreneur who does not give up. That is actually how entrepreneurs define themselves as being successful, because they keep repeating the same message that, hey, you fall down, you got to get up, brush it off and get up and do it. And that has a lot to do with flexibility and less with being fit. And that is what I want to say about frequencies, because the type of frequencies that we carry, as we have talked in the last video as well, they are created by a specific thought that we think over and over and over again just because we are used to it, and we never woke up to it, paid attention to it, and actually challenged it. So that thought keeps repeating whether we know it or not. A lot of times we don't know it because we're on autopilot. And those thoughts repeatedly create the same type of frequencies. And it is the fingerprint, the individual fingerprint that becomes unique to you. And those, when they are very stagnant, in other words, we cannot challenge these thoughts and these frequencies, those become very stubborn. And when they are very stubborn, that is when people have really hard time with changes, especially when they are huge changes, like in 2020. They are not willing to learn new things. They are not willing to understand that things are changing, and they are also not willing to take action that is corresponding to the changing time while keeping their own dignity and their own belief at the same time. So what I'm trying to say is that a person can keep his or her dignity and belief system at the same time, but still be able to be flexible enough to change with the time so that they can survive the tornado. And that, what I'm trying to say, has nothing to do with being fit. That is what I want to challenge, because I think that we should challenge ourselves in the belief system that we've been fed since we were kids, that it's survival of the fittest. What if the fittest was meant to be the person who is most flexible? Because when we are flexible, when we are smooth, in our frequencies, in our waves of frequencies, then we're able to, at the same time that we learn, we're able to cherish the changes, because change is part of the evolution of every human being. It is our job to evolve. It is our job to create. And we cannot do that if we stay in the stagnant frequencies of the past. Let's take 2020, for example. God knows how many changes human beings around the globe have had to face on a daily basis sometimes. And so it's a lot of crack in the perception that we've talked about to take in. So you are noticing, probably, if you watch how different people react to these changes. I'm sure if you haven't noticed it already, but you will notice in the future, that the ones who are flexible, who can still keep their dignity and belief system, because they speak up when something is not right, they stand up for their rights, but at the same time, they're also susceptible to changes, because they know that that is how they evolve, that is how they learn, and that is eventually how they will survive, because they are the most flexible people on earth. And mainly, that homeless guy, that day, so many years ago, that is what he taught me. That is what he showed me. He didn't say it in words himself, but I could see it. I could see it in his energy. I could see it in the way he was talking. And I could also see the way he was talking about his past, because there's no way he could have survived all of that and still be so happy and fulfilled with the person that he was at that point in time when I met him, had he not been flexible and smooth in his brain and cellular frequencies. And that is how he was surviving, because he was the survival. He was the most non-stagnant person I had met, because he was very smooth in it. And because of that, he was very flexible. Everything within him was flexible. Now, I'm not saying that people should be homeless. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that what I learned from his energies was that, and that is what triggered me to also do this sort of hobby studies that I did. Again, this is nothing that is peer-reviewed or anything like that. It's just the data that I collected, anecdotal data that I collected from people that I met over the 6-7 years and whatnot. And that is what the conclusion I could get from the data that I was collected. And because I was interested in frequencies, I translated it into frequencies, because I also saw a lot of those things in my own lab when I was doing my dissertation. So I hope this was helpful to you guys. Let me know what you think. Comment, like, share, subscribe. Thank you so much. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.